Hello, my name is Scott Dahl, and I'm a Master's Program Director and Professor of Digital Marketing and Revenue Management at Roches in Crans-Montana. Welcome to Leading Hospitality Through Turbulent Times. This session will be a presentation of about 35 minutes with 10 minutes for questions at the end. We're taking the questions in writing only. You can submit them as we go along. Just a quick reminder that the session is being recorded and will be available on your school's Moodle platform afterwards. Today's session is going to be amazing. We're fortunate enough to have two revenue leaders with us today to talk about leading in a crisis. So let's bring them out here. Our first guest is currently Senior Vice President of Revenue Management for Apple Leisure Group. He's held senior revenue management positions at Norwegian Cruise Lines, American Airlines, and Time Warner Communications before that. And so please welcome my friend, Bob Thye.
Good morning, Scott.
Hey, Bob, welcome. Okay, now let's get our other guest out here. Our next guest is also a Senior Vice President of Revenue Management. He works for Crescent Hotels and Resorts. Before he went into his current role, he worked in various revenue management positions during two separate tours with Starwood Hotels, and he had several successful years at Roches Hospitality Management. Please welcome Raul Moronto.
Thank you, everybody, and glad to be here.
Welcome, Raul. Okay, so I think it's very interesting. I mean, you guys have exactly the same title, and I think probably on paper your responsibilities are probably pretty similar. But I know you both, and your roles are actually super different. So let me start with Raul. Raul, please tell us a little bit about Crescent and what's your role there.
So thank you, everybody. Hope you're staying well and safely at home, I guess. I oversee revenue strategy for Crescent Hotels and Resorts. We actually operate about 90 hotels in US and Canada. Mostly, about 80% of our hotels are actually branded, mostly Hilton, Marriott, but we do have IHG and Hyatt. Mostly full service, and we also have a number of independent hotels and resorts. I think the difference, one of the things, for example, in the United States is very clear is that there's a difference between being, in every hotel, there is a brand, there's an owner, and there's an operator. So think of Marriott as a brand, think of an owner as an investment group, and think of the operator who actually manages the hotel. So it's very typical to have a combination of those things and the way that industries work in the United States. We happen to be a 100% operator, meaning we do not own hotels. We have no equity in any of the assets that we do. So our role, it is to manage basically hotels on behalf of others. So that makes it very interesting because, again, our business model, it is very heavily owner-centric. So we obviously want to make sure that we realize the vision for the owner. We make as much money as we can, obviously, for that owner, and that owner obviously considers that to be an investment vehicle for them and a way to actually maximize their capital. So we have, again, we're currently the fourth largest management company in the U.S. We're very dynamic in the types of properties that we have, the number of hotels that we actually do. We're about a team of 9 on the corporate side, and then there's obviously some property associates as well. But it's certainly a very interesting time to be managing hotels on behalf of others in these time of crisis. But again, very excited to be here.
Thanks, Raul. Let's shift over to Bob now. Bob, Apple Leisure Group is a completely different model from what Raul described. So do me a favor and tell us a little bit about ALG and your role there.
Sure, Scott. And again, good morning, and also a pleasure to be here. So I head up revenue management for the Apple Leisure Group, and that's the parent company of what is essentially the largest vertically integrated tour company in North America. So we have tour operators, 8 major USA-based tour operators with names like Apple Vacations, CheapCaribbean.com, FunJet, etc. We also own manage 58 all-inclusive hotels in Caribbean and Latin America. They're all inclusive. We also, it's kind of part of the vertical integration, we have a kind of 500,000 plus seat charter operation every year. So we're bringing, 3 million passengers on vacation, many of those on our own charters to the destinations where we have our hotels. We also have our own ground operator, our own DMC. So we manage the vacation end to end, including the transfers, with a vacation club as well in the mix. A bit of a, if you're based in Europe, a bit like the TUI group, you might argue, in North America, though we as well are what we call asset light. So we do not own any of our hotel properties, and we are a management company, and have a very large pipeline of hotels, even in today's environment, that continue construction and conversion. So a very large pipeline in our future. So lots of growth ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Bob. Let's stick with you, and let's jump right into the subject. So leading in a crisis. Right. So I'm just curious, when did you guys first realize that there was a problem, and what was that whole process of realizing it like?
Well, it's interesting. So, I personally was on vacation in the Maldives and arrived back home on March 9th to news of, and we've been hearing it while over in the Maldives, of all this problem in China and how horrible it was, because I was traveling through the Middle East to and from, was seeing more people personally seeing people pass through the airport with masks, etc. But where it really began to unfold as not a problem far away, but a problem for us, was first when in the United States you began to hear about a nursing home in Washington State that was closer to home, where the virus had gotten hold. But the moment where we knew we had a problem was March 17th, and that was the date that the country of Jamaica began to speak about quarantining passengers for 14 days upon arrival. And at that moment, we knew we would have to shut our hotels down. Going on vacation and being quarantined for 14 days is not a very good, beach, all-inclusive vacation. And so that was really when it just, it changed, that moment. And we knew we would have to shut our hotels down. And basically that began the domino effect of each subsequent either Caribbean destination closing their borders, whether it was just from the UK or from certain destinations. But within the course of essentially 2 weeks, we shut down 58 hotels from that moment.
Wow. So, I think I can kind of surmise from what you said, but describe your operation today.
Well, so all of our hotels are shut down. And we have 12 hotels in Europe as well under our AMResorts EMEA division. They are all shut down as well. They're in Mallorca and the Canary Islands. And so we're completely shut down. We're focused on both servicing our customers, assisting them through canceling their trips. We're also focused on really trying to retain them for future trips. So as we have passengers eligible for refunds, we're giving them some bonus credit to take a voucher for their next trip. And we're in sort of trying to stabilize the business for when we come out of this thing. So preserving cash, making sure that our operation is solid as we can be. We've got about 70% of our employees are on furlough, and those that are remaining are on reduced salaries, and that's all to get through the crisis and come out of this thing as strong as we can. So that's kind of our mode right now, and we are at this moment really beginning to think about how we come out of this thing.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about reemerging quite a bit in a few minutes. But let me shift over to Raul. Raul, how about you? When did you guys realize there was a problem, and what was that like in your organization?
Well, so I actually was traveling, I want to say the last week in February, and I actually had a very, very strange trip. I had to go to Philadelphia on Monday. I had to go to New York on Tuesday. and then I had to fly out to Florida on Wednesday. So interesting enough, I think that the moment we got to New York, we actually are meeting with an owner. At the time, I think that there was some news that I want to say either travel from China had actually just been halted. I think that there was conversations about halting travel from Europe. That we knew was going to have a very difficult, big challenge for us, particularly because New York is so heavily reliant on European travel, at least on the hotels that we actually manage. So I remember going through LaGuardia Airport, and the airport was almost empty. And I want to say the flight at that point was probably about 50% capacity. And then trying to get to Florida, and then in Florida, even at that time, nothing, there were no restrictions. People still, you got to a hotel and they still wanted to hug you. And, it's funny to think that now hugging is probably not the best thing in the world. But no shaking hands. It was a very strange point. I think that when hit me that we knew we had a bigger issue is, I want to say late that week, my son calls me, and my son is actually was supposed to graduate actually at the beginning of May. And in late February, the school had just closed classes, went online, and there were talks about canceling graduation. And to us, that's a very big deal because a lot of our hotels actually, the month of May is very important for us for our revenues because there's a lot of graduations, which brings a lot of, high-end customers and high rates and things like that. Understanding or knowing that there was a possibility of international travel from possibly disappearing and from graduations being canceled, it was a very, very big deal for us. And I think, as Bob mentioned, I think things went pretty fast after that. I want to say same thing within 2-3 weeks. I think the shock came the week after, and then we started focusing on a couple of things. One was, as I mentioned, we manage hotels on behalf of others. Every ownership group has a very different capital stack, very different investment strategy. So banks started calling and trying to figure it out. What is an updated forecast? What does that look like? And at the time, I will say middle of May, we had thought, well, the month of April is probably going to be difficult. May, we will come back. June is going to be fine. So we had said, well, we probably need to survive the next 2 months and then we'll be fine. And I think as we have realized, particularly in the U.S., restrictions haven't been standardized throughout the country. Every state and county has been different. And our goal has been just to keep up with whatever restrictions we have at the state and county level. And then being able to provide, direction to our properties at the same time that we actually are helping owners apply for relief loans and things like that. So we've been working on both sides of the fence, which is, how do we help our owners stay fluid, stay, somewhat cash preservation mode. And then at the same time, being able to provide as much information to associates of the hotels that we actually have operating to be able to survive and start planning for the recovery.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So let me stay with you, Raul. So you mentioned a lot of stuff going on right now, but how do you operate in this environment, right? It's very thin. You mentioned furloughing of employees. You mentioned 9 corporate, corporate staff of 9. I'm going to guess that was not the number on New Year's Day. That was probably a different number. But how do you manage in that environment that's so austere, and yet still prepare yourself for when demand starts to return? In other words, not lose sight of the eventual recovery.
Actually, we are lucky enough to actually work for Crescent Hotels and Resorts. At the corporate level, our CEO decided not to furlough a single associate. And that was both a conscious decision and a strategic decision in a way that we work on behalf of others. And we felt that we needed to have as many touch points with our owners and help them assist them in whatever we could in order to survive. And we felt that coming out of it, that we were going to be stronger for it. One of the challenges that we've actually had in this current environment is that brands have actually had a significant amount of furloughs. So that actually has reduced the amount of support that a hotel actually is able to provide, a brand is able to provide to the hotel, from operations to, I mean, all marketing has been halted. And I think what we have done, our team has been focusing in the month of March, a lot of it was actually trying to figure out how to forecast, provide an updated number. But beyond that, I think what we have been working on is picking up where on the field, on the property, yes, there have been some furloughs on some associates, and we have at the corporate level been able to cover a lot of that work. There's been some revenue managed associates that actually have been furloughed. We've been able to help in that process. For us, for example, in the month of April, was trying to find what business is still traveling. So we know that government still travel to some degree. We know that nurses and anything that has to do with hospitals is actually traveling. We have actually hotels that have National Guard. And being able to make those touch points, being able to call out on clients and figure it out who is still traveling, who can actually refer business to us, we have still been able to find business in this environment. And that is what we have been focusing on. And actually now, the month of May, we have been working on having a modified reopening marketing plan. As we get on, we now are figuring out how does the fall looks like. I think one of the things that happened for us is that a lot of business that would have historically been in March, April, and May, which are heavy convention hotels and heavy group months, they have been now shifting to September, October, November. So if you think about the fall and you remove the holidays, you remove the American Labor Day, you remove Halloween, you remove Thanksgiving, you probably end up with maybe good 3-4 weeks worth of travel. And that travel now is getting actually locked up with a lot of businesses. So for us, it's been an interesting situation where we would have very soft periods, but we would have these very small spikes of business that now we need to manage. And we need to manage an environment where our clients are still want to have great deals. And likely it is that because there's so much available inventory, we have to move quickly and we have to close that deal before somebody else actually offers a better deal. So it's actually been quite interesting, but we're actually being very, very busy. I didn't think that we would be busy in a 10% occupancy environment, but we are. And that's the business that we're in, and that's what we need to do for our clients.
So clearly, one of the lessons, right, is to chase the business that's available in an environment like this, right? And I think you make a really, really good point of understanding, those government travelers that are still traveling, those essential workers that are still traveling. But I think based on 26 hotels being closed, I believe that means the majority of your hotels are still open, which give you some pretty interesting visibility into booking patterns. When do you think what's your just very, very preliminary opinion? When do you think we'll start to see some of the travel that we were accustomed to before the disruption start to come back and replace some of this more situational type demand?
So it's interesting. We actually are looking at it by market segment and by location. So, for example, the moment that Georgia was the first state that actually opened, we saw an immediate spike in occupancy. The moment that Florida and Texas opened up their beaches, we started seeing an increase in bookings. Interesting enough, the highest booking lead time right now, it is under 2 days. So we're getting a significant amount of booking in the day for the day. So imagine you have nothing and now somehow you get 50, 60, 70 rooms in the day for the day. So we think that some of that has to do with staycations. We think that people are tired of being at home. And we think that leisure is going to come back. That short-term leisure, I want to travel 50, 100 miles to a resort and just enjoy the pool. We think that that's going to come back first. I think corporate, we have kind of stated, I think corporate is going to take a little bit more time, just because, for example, I'll give you my example. I have been at home for now 2 months. Eventually, in the state of Virginia, they would open up the for us to be able to go back to work in about 3 weeks. Likely it is that any person that has an office is probably going to go to the office for the next 3-4 weeks before they begin travel. So we think that even when states open up, that probably the month of July and August are still going to be lagging when it comes down to corporate travel. I think that group is also being a little bit tricky, particularly having to do with the restrictions of gathering multiple people. Unless the state actually decides to open that up, greater than 50, 100 people, it would be difficult to actually have a regular meeting, aside from the fact that people now are scared to travel. So we think that, September and October, we're going to get back to some level of consistent occupancy. I think that is going to be a scale up. Occupancy will be ramping up until September and October. And then I think that November, December, the question is going to be whether, the virus comes back and things like that. So I think that the winter of 2021 is probably going to be a little bit timid, at least in the Northeast states. I think that the South states, I think, are probably going to have a little bit more consistency when it comes down to occupancy.
Cool. So, so Bob, let me shift to you. You mentioned all your hotels are closed. You mentioned some of the things you're doing, trying to, kind of retain your customers for the future. But how can you operate today in that type of environment and still be ready for the future?
Right. So, well, we are spending most of our time looking for just sort of future demand clues, if you will. And that's what we're really focused on in terms of looking at the future. So, and much like Raul and Crescent hotels, where do we see these clues? I mean, obviously, traditional demand forecasting methodologies don't work. There is, every sort of model that you have, park it for now. And where can you find those nuggets of information that are give you clues about, where is this future demand? And so that's what we're really spending our time doing now is, looking at what segments are showing, signs of life, if you will. Where are passengers rebooking? We do have incoming bookings, right? So our hotels are closed currently, but they are open for sale for future dates. So where do we see new bookings, or where do we see those passengers that are rebooking and not making new bookings? What period on the horizon? What's their booking curve? I mean, fascinating that Crescent is seeing such strong demand within 2 days. But what is that new booking curve? Clearly, it's there's a fairly short window. It's kind of bifurcated. Fairly short window for pent-up demand, and where's that coming from and where is it going to, as well as then just longer-term trends, which we're focused on, so that as we open, we then have a better sense of where initially to target promotional and marketing efforts, and where can we capture that demand. All of our hotels are in Caribbean, Latin America, if not Europe, and all from the US, all require airlift. So we're also working closely with airline partners on what are their plans, what are our own charter plans, again, solving this this problem of chicken and the egg. If there's no air, there's no hotel. But if there's no hotel, the airlines don't want to fly there either. So we're also working on how do we prime the pump, if you will, to get passenger volume flowing into the destination, so that hotels feel comfortable opening, and once hotels are open, airlines will feel comfortable returning their flights back into the destination. So that's kind of our current focus, is looking forward and trying to get this machine moving again and identifying those demand clues of where that will be most effective.
Cool. I think that's, it's really amazing. I know that based on you guys being in so many parts of the travel industry, right? You have amazing visibility specifically into the leisure market. So you mentioned that your hotels are open for sale. I'm curious kind of what window you're actually sort of sure enough to be taking reservations, but just in general, are there any signs of life?
Yeah, so, well, we have hotels that are open for sale, really basically kind of starting in various dates in the month of July. But what's interesting is throughout the crisis, we've seen very strong a mix of demand. Granted, it's on much lower overall volume, but we have seen strong mix of demand close in. So, so back in May, or back in, sorry, late April, we were seeing rebookings in June, right? And new demand in June. We're now seeing as much demand for July as we see for November, or, September and October, right? So we do have a surprisingly strong mix of demand close in, for the dates when our hotels are open for sale. Not all of our hotels are open for sale in July, but some are, which is encouraging. So, I take from that when we do open, that we will have demand, at least some demand, for partial reopenings. And that's kind of the strategy is, if I have a 500 room hotel, I'm probably going to open 120 rooms and not all 500 right away. That we will have some of that pent up and close in demand. And this notion of, staycation is interesting. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see people go off to one of our all-inclusive hotels and work from home from there. As long as you're going to be quarantined. I was almost quarantined in the Maldives myself, but if you're going to be quarantined, it's better off to do it on a beach in Mexico, than in your basement in Pennsylvania, right?
with 5-star, 5 dining restaurant options and things like that. That's definitely the way to do it, no doubt about it. So there was a very interesting question that dovetails right into that. And that was the whole notion that one of the things we're learning right now, we'll get into what you guys are learning, but one of the things we're learning right now really, as a society, is that some office space is unnecessary. And so you mentioned the piece, and when I was working for Apple Leisure Group, no doubt one of the best places to work on a Friday was your room at one of the resorts so that you could be there for the weekend. You're absolutely right about that. But I'm curious. So, how do you guys see that potential to work from home piece impacting you? And I'll ask you first, Bob, and then Raul, when we get to you, I'll just kind of remind you to touch on that as well.
Yeah, well, Apple Leisure Group is in a little bit of an interesting time in our history, in that 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we merged with the Mark Travel Corporation, which created then our larger Apple Leisure Group. And so we actually had, sort of probably over office space, kind of when you immediately merge, we were combining companies and combining office spaces. And so we were probably heavy in office space to begin with. But now having everyone work from home has sort of accelerated the process of us realizing that we can close some of that office space, and we are. And so where previously we might have had a smaller office footprint still in one location, in several locations we are going to full work remote operations, and we are just closing office space that we didn't previously think we would necessarily close, or we previously thought we would shrink. So I do think that this, whether that's just accelerating a natural phenomenon that was occurring in, kind of American work culture, or whether it's just really a true, kind of change in the way, America works, we're certainly seeing that in our company. Our sort of office footprint is smaller coming out of this thing than it was going into this thing.
Cool. Let me ask you one other question that's come up from the audience too, and it's a little bit outside of probably your primary space, but it has to do with some of the innovation around sanitation and cleanliness. And let me actually frame it up slightly differently, in that, I'm wondering what you guys are doing with that. And there's a question from the audience about that, but also the importance of communicating that. So it's one thing to have those great processes. It's a whole other thing to be able to have people have confidence when they book. So speak to that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I mentioned previously that we've just rolled out a whole new sanitation process in our resorts. It's called Clean Complete Verification 360. So the first thing we're doing is we're doing a variety of webinars for our travel agency community and all of our tour operator partners on what those procedures are, and that has actually happened already over the last basically 10 days. And so, we are, we sell wholesalers to the trade, to the travel agency community. And so a lot of our efforts first are educating our travel partners on what all of those procedures are, to rave feedback actually on how we're communicating that to them. So a comprehensive communication plan. Then as well for consumer, all of that then posted on our websites, so that consumers can research what those processes and procedures are and confidently book, knowing what that experience will be on property.
Cool. All right, I'm going to bounce back to you, Bob, in a second and talk to you about a little bit about what you think might be some lasting changes. What's going to stick around. But let me shift over to Raul for a second. Raul, I'm going to throw you those two audience questions, if you don't mind. The first one: how do you think the whole movement towards working from home that seems to be gaining some speed will impact the hospitality industry?
So if you think about, I think it is going to be by discipline. So for example, I know that you can at some hotels check in with an app, but reality is that we are in the hospitality industry and you need people to run hotels. Even in the hotels where we actually have closed, believe it or not, there has to be somebody in the building 24/7. So majority of our general managers in the hotels that are closed are actually going to the hotel every day and still going to the building. Some of it has to do with safety, some of it has to do with protecting the asset, but there has to be somebody physically there. When it comes down to revenue strategy, then, if you think about it, the vast majority of our associates have the ability to work from home because we work on technologies that are cloud technology. So it's a lot easier for us to do that. I think that the reason why a lot of our associates actually work in the office is, particularly in the larger hotels, is because it's a lot of coordination with the sales team in terms of groups and strategies and things like that, which is a lot easier to do on the property side, again, for larger hotels, resorts, and things like that. But I do think that there's a lot of things that actually can be done remotely. I think one of the things that we have found is obviously technology is a big part in not just being able to log into email, but communicate. And the fact that we actually are doing these, remotely, actually it is the perfect example. I think all of us have been somehow experts on Zoom somehow, and that wasn't the case. And then you get into situations of, silly things like, what does your background look like? Do I have the right clothing? Do I look right on camera? Those are things, for example, that people were not used to it. And one of the reasons for that is because we have, at a hospitality industry, we've always been a very high-touch discipline, high-touch industry. We want to see everybody. We want to be able to talk to everybody. And for example, on our case, we have had far more conversations, far more communication on video with our teams now than we used to do before. So I would go 2-3 days without, talking to somebody on the phone. We just got now to about 3 times a week, but we actually had daily web calls with our entire team on video. And that, a lot of it has to do because there's a sense of community, it's a sense of connectivity that you still have to have with your teams because they're hungry for information. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if they have jobs. They don't know what to do next. And I think that we found that the best way for us to continue to communicate, whether we were in our own homes, whether we were in the basement, whether we were in a child's bedroom, it is that we still needed to see that connectivity. It is extremely important for our industry. And I would foresee that as we take into the sales and revenue, particularly on the sales side, that video is going to become a far more important part of our business. So while we'd be remote, I still think that there is a significant amount of value into having a relationship with a client that you've known for the longest time. You cannot visit them. They probably don't want you to visit them, but you still need to be able to see a face. You still be able to see a smile. You still need to have a relationship that allows you to do business in a no more normal way.
I think that's a really great point. I think that that we have learned that this is very efficient, right? That we can the amount of travel time that it takes me to go from one office to another, I simply hang up one Zoom meeting and jump into the next one. So, okay, so let me ask you that same sanitation question. I'll ask it slightly differently. So, tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing and the things you're contemplating. But here's the curiosity: is safe going to become the new luxury?
Interesting enough, I heard the other day that, clean is the new green. I think that what we are seeing is that reputation, it is going to be even more important than ever. So, if you think about websites, for example, like TripAdvisor, your TripAdvisor rating is going to have a very big impact in the popularity of your hotels. We think that is going to be, that perception of cleanliness is going to be very important. So I'll give you an example. I actually stayed, I had to go to Boston for my son's council graduation, but I actually stayed at a hotel. The experience from check-in to my room was actually quite interesting because there was a sanitation station probably every 10 feet. The person that checked me in had gloves and had a mask and handed me a paper and actually said, you can probably check in with your app and get your key through your phone. And I think that that's probably the extreme. I think that is going to change a little bit, but I think that the perception of cleanliness is going to be very important moving forward. And you're probably going to see far more signs about staying clean than you are going to be about marketing the Hilton brand or the Marriott brand. So I think that in the past, you would have gone to an elevator and would have seen a banner that actually promotes the brand or promotes different hotels. I think safety, cleanliness, knowing that somebody went into your room, for example, we check in and we have little notes from housekeepers to say, I just cleaned your room. I think those little details are going to be extremely important. Other interesting thing is, for example, in our hotels, we now, if you check out, we won't clean your room for 2 days. And the reason for that is because the assumption is that if there was a virus in the room, that room is the virus is going to die in 48 hours. So as we start cleaning rooms, I think there's also going to be a question about not just what chemicals we use, and we have an entire procedure to enhance cleanliness, but what happens, for example, to things that we wouldn't worry about, your pillow. Would you replace your pillow on every stay and every checkout? Do you take your pillow and now put it in a dryer for 20 minutes to kill any bacteria they have out there? So there's been a significant amount of enhancement procedures that we have put in place that we wouldn't have thought. I think the majority of those are probably going to stay. I think that the more drastic ones, the face covers and things like that, I think eventually those would probably go away. Gloves, I think, would eventually go away in a normal setting. But for now, I think that they're in for the next 4 or 5 months. And I think guests are also going to be expecting that. So we need to be conscious of that.
Thank you. Thanks, Raul. So, Bob, let me now come over to you and ask you for a prophecy. Obviously, a lot's being learned right now. But I'm just kind of curious, what do you think are some of the things that are likely to stick around, to be lasting, and to become part of the next normal, so to speak?
Well, I think one of the things that we've really learned, and I think will kind of permanently change a bit, is just travel insurance, right? So we're finding, one of the most significant challenges for our travel agent partners was the whole kind of refund process, who's eligible for what. That was a very significant kind of effort. And then for our passengers as well, we sell, 100% cash back insurance. And that was a significant benefit for many, many of our passengers. And so I think people will think about travel insurance very differently in the future and see the value of it far more than maybe previously. And we always had a fairly decent attach rate of insurance, but we've seen that really skyrocket now going forward for new and kind of rebookings, where people are really, attaching insurance. And I think that's not just in the short term, as people want to make sure they have flexibility, because face it, most of the travel companies right now are providing that flexibility. But our travel insurance products include both a pre-departure, cancel for any reason type attribute, but as well there's the in-destination, kind of medical that comes along with it. And I think this just sort of permanently resets people's perspective about what can happen, and what to be prepared for. So that kind of level of protection and preparedness, I think, is just going to be a new mindset as people do travel. So I think people will get back on the road and back traveling, but they'll probably value that travel protection a little more than previously. And then just the other thing too is, I'm surprised myself personally how comfortable I am now after just, several weeks. Wearing a mask into a grocery store or to my local, building supply store. That would have been unthinkable for me just 2 months ago. And now, I will stare at someone who's not wearing one, as if that's the abnormal or, out of the norm behavior. So I think that passengers are just, travelers are going to be much more comfortable with just regular protocols around, cleanliness and safety, whether that's masks, gloves. I think, rather than getting a welcome drink when you arrive on resort, you're going to get a squirt of hand sanitizer. Right, and that's going to feel normal, and that's going to feel, well, wait a minute, where's my hand sanitizer, rather than, wait, where's my flowery tropical drink, right, or where's my champagne drink, where's my hand sanitizer, and so I think those are things that are kind of permanent mindset changes that we'll see going forward.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I can see very nice branded logoed hand sanitizer with a little umbrella sticking out of it. It doesn't have the same impact, I think, as a coconut with a straw, but maybe that is the new normal.
Right.
All right, guys. So this has been a fantastic session. We're kind of running up against our time. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to start with Raul first. But what I'd like to do, consider the audience, students getting ready to enter the hospitality industry. So Raul, one final word of wisdom for that group of people.
I think that if you consider, for example, that there's a potential vaccine happening in the next, let's call it year, just understand that by the time that, if you're not graduating this year, if you're graduating next year, this will probably be over. At least the major crisis is going to be over. I think that there's going to be some mild changes to our industry when it comes down to actually food and beverages being one interesting potential change in terms of serving and distancing and things like that. But in general, I think that if you consider that a year from now, we're probably going to be looking at a very different environment. I think technology obviously is going to be a play and continue to play a big part in what we do. But the most important thing I think you remember is hotels cannot run themselves. And at the end of the day, as technology replaces what we call the predictable outcome, right? If this happens and that happens, particularly in the technology environment, what is left in our industry is the decision-making process. What's left in our industry is you cannot automate excitement, enthusiasm, strategy, direction. I think that what I would probably say is, while yes, digital will continue to play a big role and technology will continue to play a big role, at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership. How did we navigate through this process? What kind of information did we provide to our associates? I think those are going to be the things that are going to be critical for the future. If you think about a team and you think about any type of sport, the players, you can have great players, you can have a great facilities. Just as important is the coaching. And at the end of the day, that is probably going to be, as you start coming out of these environments, that do not forget that at the end of the day, we are the hospitality industry. It is still an industry of people, serving people and providing experiences. You cannot create experiences through a robot. So at the end of the day, remember that just as important as it is what you learn in school and what you learn in the tricks of the trade, I think at the end of the day, somebody needs to be able to provide that leadership, to be able to take the hotel, to be able to put whatever business you're in to the next level.
Cool. Thank you. That's super advice. And so, Bob, I've known you for a while. How about one final life-changing word of wisdom from Bob Thye?
Well, and so my point of view is framed a little bit from having worked at American Airlines during the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and where no planes flew for I think 6 days, and at that time, we thought travel was over. No one would ever travel again, and now look at how robust travel had been in the last few years, prior to this event. So. My thinking and my word of wisdom would be, in a very long career, you will remember back at this time and marvel back at, kind of this short-term issue, and think of it as it was very short-term time, and what that impact was, and how we thought right now, oh well, our hotels won't open, people won't travel. This will permanently stunt, the travel industry and my career prospects. And I would just say, if you'll look back, and this is in a very long career, this is a very short period of time, and travel is here to stay. The world will travel again. We will get back to growth and providing amazing experiences for people, and that's why I'm passionate about this industry, and that's why I'm in it, because travel is the kind of the lifeblood of kind of human need, and that will never die. And so just don't let this daunt your your career aspirations.
That's beautiful. So I think that's fantastic. So, right, I think it's pretty good advice. Leadership is key, and perseverance is what will get you through this. So fantastic advice. Gentlemen, Bob, Raul, I want to thank you both very much for the time you've spent with us. I think it was a fantastic session. Really enjoyed it myself, and I hope our audience did too. For those of you that are attending, I hope that you enjoyed it. I think we addressed all of the questions, and so I want to thank everyone that was here today, and thank our panelists once again, and wish you guys all a fantastic week. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.